Good morning. Hope you guys are doing well. We're just going to take a couple minutes here to go over the study guide that I handed out yesterday. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here on this graph. This is what your graph should look like after sketching everything that was going on with Billy and this monster hill that he is skiing. So if you need to pause right now, go ahead and pause so you can check the accuracy of your sketch compared to mine. And then we're going to go ahead and go through the answers. So number 2, because number 1 was to sketch it, what quantity described above is represented by the independent variables? Remember, independent is the x value, so that's going to be time. What quantity described above is represented by the dependent variables? That's going to be the height above or below the lodge in feet. That's our y-axis. What ordered pair is the x-intercept? So this one, there's a few x-intercepts, right? Because the x-intercept happens to be, the 0 here on the grid. So you could have chosen this one, or this one, or this one. I just chose 280, 0 right here. Let's see here, because that's where it looks like it passes for my line. So again, on the quiz, as long as it looks like something that goes through the x-axis, we're good. What ordered pair is the y-intercept? Okay, well that's 0, 0. This could also be your x-intercept, honestly, because it's still on the x-axis as well. Correctly represent one region on the graph where the relation is increasing. So I choose between 140 and 220, right, because that's where it's increasing. Oops, sorry about that. It's increasing between 140 and 220. I also could have chosen between 0 and 80, or I could have chosen between 320 and 380. There were a couple different options there. But yeah, you'll need to write that as an inequality. Correctly represent one region on the graph where the relation is decreasing. So I'd only really have, this section here where he's going down, or I could have chosen this little section that he took to get to the other lift. So I'm going to choose between 260 and 280. So I'm going to say 260 less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 280, because it's between those times that he is decreasing. Okay, that's when he was like, shoom, all the way down the hill. Okay. Correctly represent one region on the graph where the relation is positive. The reason 1 is underlined is because there are several regions where the relation is positive, right? So you could have chosen a few of these. I'm going to choose between 80 and 140 because that's a positive region. So there we go. Correctly represent one region on the graph where the relation is negative. So again, there's a couple answers you could have chosen here. Negative is considered underneath the x-axis, like underneath the 0, right? So I'm going to choose between 290 and 320 because this is a negative region down here. Okay. Identify the absolute maximum as an ordered pair. What does it represent? So if I go back to the graph, this section here, this whole thing would be my absolute maximum. So I'm just going to choose one of these ordered pairs. So I'm going to choose 220, 300. And so let's go ahead and write that down. And what does it represent? That represents the time in seconds that he, at 220 seconds, he was 300 feet above the lodge. Okay, so at 220 seconds, he was 300 feet above the lodge. Oops. I'm having trouble this morning, guys. Lodge. There we go. Identify a relative maximum and state the interval on which it exists. So if I'm looking for a relative maximum, remember that is an area that is not a peak, but it's still pretty, like it's not the highest peak, but it would be considered, a peak. So I'm going to do this section here. So I'm going to choose 80, 150. I'm just going to choose that ordered pair. And the interval would be between, so if I had to choose an interval, I could say it's between, 0 and 140, because that is actually in between those two ordered pairs. Okay. Identify an absolute minimum as an ordered pair. What does it represent? So an absolute minimum would be down here where he was waiting for that ski lift, right? So I'm going to choose 320, negative 100. And that tells us that at 320 seconds, he was 100 feet below the lodge. Okay. Identify a relative minimum and state the interval on which it occurs. So this one's a little bit tricky, but it kind of works. This could be considered a relative minimum because it's still low, but it's not our lowest dip, right? So I'm going to go ahead and choose this point. So that's 280, negative 150. Excuse me, just negative 50, not 150. Just negative 50. And the interval that exists, so where did that happen? We could say that's between 260 and 300 because it is in between those two, or even just 260 and 290. Remember we had this weird 10-second thing. So let's say that, between 260 and 290. Okay, so those are some things that you'll need to do for the quiz tomorrow. We just have one more page to look at, one more information, so one more question. So we've got Susie here. She's on her way home after school. Hopefully this sounds familiar to you guys. What does this graph tell us? So again, this is kind of up for interpretation. Remember yesterday we had some slightly scarier versions of what might be happening, people being chased by scary men, what have you. So if I was going to make up a story for this, well, oops, first of all, I should label my axes, right? So go ahead and label these. So we're talking about time in minutes, and then distance from home in increments of 100 feet. Okay. All right, so let's go back here to what story we think we're going to tell. So the graph tells us that she was headed home, and then for a very long period of time she hung out from 3 to 7 minutes, right? And then she started back to school, and then she realized, oh my gosh, I have to go faster. So here's what I think is happening. And again, you may have a way more entertaining story than I do, but I think that Susie was on her way home, stopped to talk to a friend, then realized she had practice. I don't know, what sport do we want Susie to be involved in? We'll say cross-country practice. Then went back to school for practice. Right, because she never makes it back home. We don't know. Maybe she'll be going back home later, but she definitely goes all the way back to school and then stays there. Okay, so that's going to be our scenario. What might be happening between interval 3 and 7? So we kind of talked about this up in our description. What might be happening here? She could be talking with a friend. She could be, maybe she stopped somewhere to help somebody for a few minutes, right? Maybe somebody had trouble with their bike. We're going to go ahead and assume that Susie's a really nice person. So we're going to say she stopped to chat or help someone, right? Maybe Susie's an 8th grader and she saw that a 6th grader needed some help, but she was friendly. Okay, so then where is Susie at the 10-minute mark? So if we go back to our graph, where is she at 10 minutes? She's back at school. Right, so she's back at school, and in our perfect world, she's at cross-country practice. Okay, so this is the remainder. This was your study guide. Study it, know it, love it, learn it, and you guys are going to take the quiz tomorrow. So if you have any questions, as always, email me. I'll get back to you as soon as I can, and I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you.